Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with voices, heavy, clipped, urgent. Men leaned over maps, fingers stabbing at red-marked zones. Radios hissed with static updates. A projector cast dim blue light over faces lined with fatigue. And she sat in the corner, silent, observing. Her presence barely registered. Not one voice asked her opinion. Not one hand gestured her way. She might as well have been a shadow, an observer, not a participant. But she was listening. Every detail, every misstep, every assumption. And while they debated tactics, logistics, contingencies, she carried something none of them had. Something she hadn't told them, not yet. The clock ticked, 42 minutes until wheels up. She adjusted her posture quietly. The chair creaked. One of the officers shot her a brief glance, not hostile, not dismissive, just indifferent, as if to say, "You're here, fine, but you're not one of us." She grown used to that. The commander's voice cut through the air, gravelly. "We breach at 200. Intel confirms high-value presence inside the compound. Extraction window is slim. We get in, we get him out, we vanish before dawn." A murmur of assent circled the table. The plan sounded clean, almost simple, but her eyes lingered on the satellite image projected against the wall. Angled walls, narrow alleys, blind spots disguised as courtyards. She knew that place, not from maps, not from reports. From memory. Her hand tightened into a fist under the table. She could still smell the dust, hear the echo of boots, remember the face of a man who never walked out alive. Her chest rose, then stilled. She didn't interrupt, not yet. Across from her, Corporal Davis tapped a pen against the tabletop, a rhythm of nerves disguised as boredom. He noticed her watching. He smirked, almost apologetic. He was young, too young. She wondered if he had anyone waiting for him back home, or if he was one of those who pretended not to care. The commander wrapped up, "Questions." The room stilled, silence stretched. She breathed once, slow. The question she held burned at the back of her throat. She could speak. She could tell them what they were walking into. She could argue for adjustments, for caution. But she knew the weight of her voice here. They'd brush it aside, again. So she stayed quiet. When the meeting broke, boots scraped against the floor, chairs shoved back. She waited until the crowd thinned before rising. Her pack was already prepared. She traveled light, lighter than the rest. Every item carried had meaning, necessity. No excess. Outside, the air was sharp, desert cold. The sky stretched black, pinpricked with stars that felt impossibly far away. She pulled her jacket tight. The chill sank into her bones, but she welcomed it. Cold kept her awake. Cold reminded her she was still here. Footsteps approached. Davis again. "You don't talk much, do you?" His tone was casual, almost friendly. She gave a faint smile, barely there. "Not much to say." He shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe you've seen more than the rest of us. You got that look." Her gaze flicked to him. For a heartbeat she considered telling him, just him, what she remembered about that compound, what it meant. But his eyes were too young, too open. He wouldn't understand, not yet. "Get some rest," she said instead. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Rest, right, see you on the bird." He walked away, leaving her in silence. She tilted her head back, staring at the stars. One in particular flickered brighter than the rest. She thought of home, a porch light left on in the dark, a promise unfulfilled. She'd written letters she never sent, whole pages of apologies, confessions, half-finished truths. Her hands could take lives at a distance, but they couldn't bridge that gap of words to someone she cared for. Now the mission loomed, and those letters would remain folded, hidden in the lining of her pack, just in case. The chopper blades thundered hours later, kicking dust into spirals. The team loaded in, joking in low tones, checking gear, masking nerves. She climbed aboard without a word, settling into the corner seat. The harness straps cut across her shoulders. Familiar weight, familiar restraint. No one spoke to her during the flight, not because of hostility, because they didn't know how. She didn't mind. She closed her eyes, let the vibration rattle through her bones, and let her breathing match the rhythm of the blades. But in the darkness behind her eyelids another memory surfaced. A scream, a doorway collapsing, the flash of a muzzle, and a man, one she should have saved, falling into the dust. Her jaw clenched, her pulse quickened. She opened her eyes, the others hadn't noticed. The helicopter descended, rotors slicing air into chaos. The team dropped fast, boots sinking into dirt, weapons raised, eyes scanning. She hit the ground last, silent as shadow. The night wrapped them in secrecy. A crescent moon hung low, casting faint silver across broken walls and scattered stones. Dogs barked somewhere distant, cut off abruptly. They advanced, formation tight. The compound rose ahead, a hulking silhouette. From the outside it looked lifeless, too lifeless. She saw what they didn't, the subtle slant of shadows, the faint outline of concealed scaffolding, the telltale gaps where bricks were newer, cleaner. She could speak now, warn them, stop them. But she stayed silent. Because some truths, once spoken, shifted everything, and she needed them focused, not doubting. They breached, doors splintered, voices roared commands in sharp, foreign syllables. Gunfire erupted, sudden, deafening, merciless. The night exploded into chaos. She moved with precision, every shot measured, every step controlled. The air smelled of cordite, of blood, of fear. Men shouted, some fell. She kept her breathing steady. Davis stumbled near her, his face pale but determined. He fired blindly around a corner, too blind. She grabbed his vest, yanked him back just as bullets tore through where he'd been standing. His eyes widened. He swallowed, nodding once. She said nothing. Minutes stretched like hours. The team pressed deeper into the compound, room by room. Sweat stung her eyes. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. And then it happened. A sound she hadn't heard in years. A voice, faint, from deeper within. A single word in a language most here wouldn't recognize. But she did. Her blood ran cold. Because that voice belonged to someone she thought was dead. She froze in the middle of the corridor. The others surged past, boots hammering stone, rifles barking sharp bursts into the dark. Orders snapped through comms. The chaos of war filled every corner, but she stood still. That voice, it cut through everything, faint, distant, impossible. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could barely breathe. No, it can't be. The compound walls seemed to close in, pressing her with memories. The smell of plaster dust, the echoes of the past, the night years ago when she lost him, when she swore she'd never hear his voice again. And yet she had. Davis nearly slammed into her back. "Move," he shouted over the noise, tugging her sleeve. He didn't see the look on her face, pale, shaken, eyes unfocused. He just thought she'd frozen under fire. She nodded quickly, forcing herself forward, masking the quake in her chest. But inside, every step was a battle. The corridor split into two halls. The team veered left, chasing gunfire and the shouted commands of the commander. She hesitated, just for a breath, glancing right. That voice had come from there. The narrow passage lay in shadow, untouched, silent. She swallowed hard. Stay with the team. Don't break formation. That's what she'd been trained to do, what protocol demanded. But something deeper, older, more personal pulled her. A whisper in her mind, what if it's real? What if he's alive? The others didn't notice when she slipped away. Her boots were soundless against stone. Her weapon angled low, finger tight along the guard. She moved like a ghost, her breath controlled, each corner cleared with silent precision. The hall grew darker. The stench of damp earth mixed with smoke. She passed a collapsed doorway, the bricks blackened by fire, her chest constricted. She remembered this wing. The last time she'd been here, it had been in ruins. The mission had gone sideways. Explosions, fire, screams, and him. his last words echoing before the ceiling caved. But if he had survived? Her throat tightened. She forced the thought away. Hope was dangerous. Hope could blind you. A sound ahead. Not a voice this time, the shuffle of feet, a soft cough. She raised her rifle, muscles taut, eyes narrowing as the dark corridor ended in a half-broken door. She approached slowly, carefully, her breath shallow. And then she heard it again, clearer. A man's voice, hoarse, cracked, speaking a name. Her name. Her chest lurched, the world seemed to tilt. She pushed the door. It groaned on its hinges, swinging inward. Moonlight filtered through a hole in the ceiling, spilling silver across the room. And in the corner, bound by chains, beaten but alive, was Captain Mark Hale. Her brother. Her mouth went dry. For years she'd believed he was gone, killed in the fire, buried under stone. She carried his dog tags, folded his flag, lived with the guilt of being the one who made it out. But he was here. His face lifted toward her. Blood streaked his temple. His lips cracked into something between a smile and disbelief. I knew, his voice rasped, weak but certain. I knew you'd come. Her body trembled, not from fear, from everything else. Relief, rage, guilt, a storm inside her chest. She lowered her rifle, rushing forward. Her hands shook as she touched his chains, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. Mark, her voice broke on his name. I. Quiet, his whisper cut her off, urgent. They're coming, you have to. Bootsteps thundered outside. Harsh voices barked orders in the foreign tongue. Her head snapped to the door, too late to slip away unseen, too many. Her hand hovered over her comms. She could call the team, draw them here. But the mission would shift. Everything they came for would unravel. The commander's voice still echoed in her ear. High-value presence inside the compound. Extraction window is slim. The mission wasn't her brother. It was someone else. Someone strategic. Someone important to the bigger picture. If she called this in, if she revealed him, it would change everything. Her breath caught. Her loyalty pulled in two directions. Duty versus blood. Mission versus family. The door slammed open. Armed men stormed in. She didn't hesitate. The rifle snapped up, barked 3 sharp bursts. 2 men fell instantly. The third fired wildly, bullets ricocheting against stone. She ducked, rolled, came up firing. His body collapsed with a heavy thud. The room filled with smoke, the metallic tang of gunpowder. Mark coughed, straining against his chains. His eyes were wide, desperate. They'll know you're here now. You have to decide, either free me or, his voice broke, or finish what you started years ago. Her heart twisted. Years ago, the fire, the mission gone wrong, the collapse. She had dragged herself out, but not him. She had thought he died there, buried alive, and she had carried that failure every day since. But now he was alive, right in front of her. And she was out of time. The radio crackled in her ear. The commander's voice, teams in position, moving to target chamber. Where the hell are you? Her eyes flicked from the comm to Mark. His chains rattled as he strained closer, eyes pleading. She whispered, voice raw, almost trembling, I don't argue, I act. And she raised her weapon. Her finger rested against the trigger, not pulling, not releasing, suspended in a storm of memory and duty. Mark's eyes locked onto hers, bruised, bloodshot, but unbroken. Don't hesitate, he whispered, the same words he used to tell her back on the training fields when they were just recruits. Back then, it had been advice for survival. Now it felt like a verdict. The radio hissed again in her ear. Echo 2, where the hell are you? We're breaching the primary chamber now. Time on target, 90 seconds. Her chest tightened, 90 seconds. Her brother's chains rattled as he struggled to shift upright. His lips were cracked, his voice weak, but his eyes carried something fierce. You can't leave me here. She swallowed hard. You were dead. The words fell from her mouth before she could stop them. I buried you, Mark, I. Not dead, he rasped. Forgotten, left. The accusation cut sharper than any blade. Her hands shook. She gripped the rifle tighter to steady them, but the weight didn't help. Boots thundered outside again, more enemies converging, voices rising, the air filling with approaching violence. She didn't have time for this conversation, but her heart refused to let go. Mark leaned forward as far as the chains allowed. You came back for the mission, but tell me the truth, wasn't it always for me? Her breath caught. He was right. She volunteered for this operation the moment she recognized the compound in the briefing image. She hadn't told anyone why, hadn't told anyone what this place meant. That secret had been hers alone. And now here he was. The radio crackled, sharp and insistent. Echo 2 status, do you copy? Her throat closed, she had to choose. With a sudden burst of motion, she slung her rifle onto her shoulder and yanked the cutting tool from her pack. Sparks spat as the metal bit against chains, the grating noise mixing with the distant rattle of gunfire. Mark gasped as the first link snapped. His chest heaved, eyes wide with disbelief. You're breaking protocol, he stammered. Protocol doesn't breathe, protocol doesn't bleed, she whispered back, her voice ragged. You do. The last chain gave way with a sharp crack. Mark slumped forward, catching himself against the wall. He was weak, barely able to stand, but alive. She looped his arm over her shoulder, her frame bracing against his weight. He felt heavier than she remembered, not in mass, but in history, in guilt, in every year she had spent thinking she failed him. The radio voice barked louder now, urgent. Echo 2, respond. Are you compromised? She pressed the comm button once, a silent click. Not a word, just enough to tell them she was still out there. And then she moved. The corridor ahead was a gauntlet. Shouts echoed, boots slammed stone, shadows shifted under the flicker of bare bulbs. She guided Mark as best she could, his weight slowing her pace. Her rifle angled forward, her steps deliberate, every sense heightened to the edge of breaking. The first enemy rounded the corner, she fired once clean. His body crumpled soundlessly. Another followed, shouting, raising his weapon. She shot twice, sharp and surgical. He dropped. Mark's breath rasped against her shoulder. You never missed. She didn't answer. Her chest burned with the effort, with the flood of emotion she couldn't let through. They reached a narrow stairwell. She paused, pressed him against the wall, scanning upward. The faint beam of moonlight cut through cracks, highlighting dust drifting in the air. Somewhere above, the rest of her team was storming the compound, closing on their own objective. If she took him up these stairs, she'd collide with them. She'd have to explain. Questions would follow, delays, risks. And if she did? Her stomach churned. Mark grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. Listen to me. I know what's in this place. I know why they want it, but it's not worth your team's lives. It's not worth yours. She blinked at him. What do you mean? His eyes shifted, dark and heavy. They think it's one man, a target, a name, but it's more than that. They're holding knowledge here, information, files, something bigger than either of us. You bring that out, you change the whole war. Her blood ran cold. The commander's voice echoed in her ear again, urgent, strained. Primary chamber secure. Package located. Need all units on exfil route in 3 minutes. Echo 2, where are you? 3 minutes. She looked at Mark, at the bruises, the scars, the chains lying broken at his feet. He was her family, her blood, but his words gnawed at her, bigger than us. She helped him to the stairs. We'll move together. Step by step they climbed. Each movement was slow, labored. Mark stumbled more than once, his weight dragging against her, but she refused to let him fall. Halfway up, bullets sparked against the wall beside her head. She shoved Mark down, returning fire with precise bursts. 2 enemies toppled from the landing above, tumbling into the dark. The silence afterward felt deafening. She breathed heavily, sweat stinging her eyes. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind stayed sharp, focused. She couldn't afford doubt now. At the top of the stairs, a shadow emerged, rifle raised. She aimed, then froze. It wasn't the enemy, it was Davis. His eyes widened at the sight of her. Then they shifted to the man slumped at her side. "Who the hell?" his words caught. "That's Hale," his voice cracked in disbelief. "But he's not dead," she snapped. Her tone was sharp, but underneath was something breaking. Davis hesitated, lowering his rifle. "The commander needs us on the exfil. Now, if you bring him," his words faltered, "it changes everything." She knew, she'd known since the moment she cut the chains. Behind Davis, shouts erupted from the other end of the hall. More enemies closing in. No more time to argue. She shifted Mark's weight, lifting him higher, and pushed forward past Davis. "Then let my actions speak." They moved as a trio, the air thick with tension, every step echoing with approaching gunfire. When they reached the chamber where the team had secured the target, the sight froze everyone. The commander turned, eyes hard as steel. His gaze dropped to Mark. Recognition flickered, shock, and then fury. "What the hell have you done?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. And she, breathless, trembling, carrying the weight of her brother and her choice, whispered only one thing. What had to be done? The room went dead silent. Only the crackle of radios, the drip of water from a fractured pipe, and the shallow, labored breaths of the wounded filled the air. Dust swirled in the dim shafts of moonlight cutting through the ceiling. All eyes locked on her, on the weight she carried, on the man she dragged back from the dead. "Captain Hale." The commander's jaw tightened, his face carved from stone. "You broke formation. You compromised the mission." His voice was low, dangerous, colder than the steel of the rifles leveled across the chamber. She adjusted her grip on Mark, steadying him against her shoulder. Her own body shook with exhaustion, but her eyes didn't flinch. "I made a choice." The commander's gaze darkened. "You made your choice, not ours, not the mission." Behind him, the secured target, a hooded figure bound at the wrists, sat slumped on the ground. The so-called package. The reason they were here. A man the world would never see, but whose secrets would redraw lines of power. The commander's hand hovered near his weapon. He wasn't aiming at the enemy. He was aiming at her. Davis shifted uneasily, his voice breaking the silence. "Sir, that's Hale, her brother. He's supposed to be." "Supposed to be dead," the commander cut sharply. His eyes snapped back to her. "And maybe he should have stayed that way." Mark coughed, weak but defiant. His voice rasped. "You don't understand what they're keeping here, what they've built. If you don't take me with you, if you leave me, everything you're doing here won't matter." The commander barked a bitter laugh. "You've been a prisoner for years. You think your intel outweighs the package. You think you're more important than the man we came for." Mark's eyes burned, fierce through the blood and bruises. "I know what's behind those doors." He nodded toward the reinforced steel at the far end of the chamber. "You think he's the only prize? They're hiding files, projects, things that make this war look like child's play. You take him, you win a battle. You take what they're hiding, you win the war." The commander's silence stretched. His jaw worked. He didn't like hearing it, but he didn't dismiss it either. The rest of the team shifted nervously, caught between orders and truth, between trust and doubt. She finally spoke, her voice quiet, trembling but firm. "You told us this mission was about more than any one of us, about the bigger picture. That's exactly what he's talking about." The commander's eyes drilled into hers. "And what about you? This wasn't about the bigger picture for you. This was about blood, about guilt." The words struck hard. They tore at her chest, scraping against the truth she couldn't deny. She had come here for the mission, but also for Mark. Maybe more for Mark than anything else. Her lips parted, then closed. She couldn't argue, not with words. The commander shook his head slowly. "You've put us all at risk." Gunfire rattled outside, closer now. The walls shook with the thunder of explosions. The enemy was regrouping, tightening the net around them. There was no more time to argue. Mark forced himself upright, pulling free from her support. His legs wobbled but held. His voice, though weak, cut with urgency. Decide, right now, you take him, you take me, or you take nothing. But if you leave me, you're leaving behind the only person who knows what's coming. The commander's hand hovered still near his weapon. His eyes flicked between Mark, the hooded prisoner, and her. Calculations burned behind them: risk, cost, orders, consequences. Finally, he spat the words through clenched teeth. Fine, he comes. But if he slows us down, if one life is lost because of him, it's on you. The weight of his stare crushed her, but she didn't falter. She nodded once. Silent acceptance. The team moved, fast. They hauled the hooded package, secured gear, checked ammunition. Every man's face was tight, drawn, heavy with unspoken judgment. She fell in at the rear, supporting Mark with one arm while her rifle hung ready in the other. His weight dragged her pace, but she carried it, every step. The corridors bled chaos. Enemy fighters poured in, shouting, firing, shadows flickering under bursts of muzzle flash. The air reeked of smoke and sweat. She covered their retreat, firing in sharp, measured bursts. Davis stayed close, eyes flicking to her often, confusion and fear warring in his expression. "Why'd you do it?" he hissed between volleys. "Why risk everything for one man?" Her answer came soft between breaths. "Because some things don't need words, they need action." They burst into the courtyard, the night air colder, sharper, filled with the sting of cordite and the metallic bite of blood. The moon painted everything silver, a haunting stage for violence. Gunfire lit the shadows. Men fell. Others surged forward. The commander barked orders, his voice carrying like a blade through the noise. And through it all she held on, to her rifle, to her brother, to the choice that defined her. Mark stumbled, knees buckling. She hauled him upright, whispering through clenched teeth, "One more step, just one more." The roar of engines cut through the chaos. Their ride. Black silhouettes descended from the night sky, rotors screaming, dust spiraling. Salvation. But it wasn't close enough. The enemy surged harder, sensing desperation. Bullets whined past her ear. Stones shattered near her feet. A man lunged from the shadows. She dropped him with a single, precise shot. Then another, then another. Her shoulders ached, her lungs burned, but her hands were steady, always steady. The commander's voice roared over the chaos. "Move, move, we're leaving in 60. 60 seconds. She dragged Mark forward, her body screaming, her soul torn between relief and fear. And as the helicopters descended, as the dust rose, as the battlefield reached its fever pitch, she knew one thing with searing clarity. This wasn't the end, not of the mission, not of the war, not of her reckoning. Because saving him had only been the first act. What came next would demand more than even she was ready to give. Why did her hands shake that night, long after the shooting stopped? The barracks were silent. No one spoke. The air carried the weight of things left unsaid. Outside, diesel engines rumbled faintly, a mechanical heartbeat of a base that never truly slept. But inside her, the noise was deafening. Not from gunfire, not from the blast, from memory, from the words she had never spoken aloud. She sat at the edge of the cot, boots still on, uniform still dusty. A rifle leaned against the wall, not cleaned, not touched, just there, like a shadow. Her palms pressed against her knees as though anchoring herself to the present. But her mind kept slipping, kept going back. There had been a moment just hours earlier when everything slowed. She remembered the pressure of the trigger under her finger, the blur of movement, the scream over comms, the shot she hadn't fired, the one she'd held back against instinct, against training, and the face she'd seen because of it, a face that wasn't supposed to be there, a face that changed the meaning of the mission. But she hadn't told anyone, not yet. Across the room, Morales lay sprawled on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, one arm thrown over his eyes. He hadn't closed them once since they came back. Rafik sat hunched with his back against the lockers, head buried in his hands. Even the captain, who never seemed human enough to feel, had retreated to his quarters without the usual after-action bark of orders. They were alive. Against every expectation, they were alive, and yet the silence felt heavier than loss. Her mind drifted back to the convoy ride home, dust choking the air. The way the medic clutched the stretcher like it was the only thing holding him together. The way one of the younger soldiers, barely 20, kept whispering prayers under his breath. She had wanted to join in, to say something, anything, but words failed her. They always did. She had learned long ago that words weren't her weapon. Actions were. Silence was her language, and tonight her silence was louder than ever. A soft creak pulled her back. Rafik lifted his head. His eyes were hollow, rimmed red. You saw it too, didn't you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Her chest tightened, saw what she wanted to ask, but he knew. Somehow he knew. "The kid," he said, swallowing hard. "In the ruins, that wasn't in the briefing." Her throat felt dry. She forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes searched hers, desperate, afraid, pleading for confirmation that he wasn't losing his mind. She didn't speak, she just held his stare, and that was answer enough. He exhaled sharply, running a trembling hand through his hair. "God, I thought I was seeing things." The room shifted. Morales moved his arm, revealing eyes glistening with something that wasn't just exhaustion. "We weren't supposed to." He stopped, clenched his jaw, and turned his head away. No one finished the thought. No one said what lingered between them, that they had been walking a line thinner than they'd been told, that the mission hadn't been what command painted it as, that civilians weren't supposed to be there. She closed her eyes, feeling the burn of unshed tears. They'd been soldiers long enough to accept risk, accept loss, but innocence, that wasn't something you just filed in a report. And yet she hadn't fired, she'd broken protocol. She'd hesitated when hesitation could have cost lives, but it hadn't, not tonight. Her silence, her restraint had saved someone. And still, would anyone see it that way? Or would they only see failure? Her father's voice came back to her, years old, buried deep, a man of the military, hard and unyielding. "You don't speak unless you can make it matter. Out there, silence is weakness. Speak, or they'll write your story without you." But she'd never believed that, not fully. Silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice, a way of listening, a way of carrying truth without spilling it too soon. She drew a shaky breath, lifted her gaze, and studied her team. Broken men, haunted eyes, wounded souls. They didn't need words from her. They needed the strength she could hold, even in quiet. The silence stretched, a strange kind of unity in it. No arguments, no blame, just a shared understanding that they had seen something that would follow them for the rest of their lives. And in that silence, something shifted in her too. She realized her actions had spoken already, not just in the field, but here, in the stillness. She had chosen restraint when violence was easier. She had chosen presence when denial was safer. They didn't need her to argue. They didn't need her to explain. Her actions were already the speech none of them could put into words. Later, long past midnight, she finally unlaced her boots. The sound of them hitting the floor echoed in the quiet. She lay down, staring at the dim light seeping through the blinds, listening to the hum of a bass that pretended everything was normal. Sleep didn't come, but neither did regret. Because sometimes the loudest things were never said at all. And somewhere far away, a child was still alive because of that silence. That truth was hers to carry, for now. Why did command call her in alone? The hallway outside the briefing room was cold, lined with steel and silence. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, throwing sharp shadows on the concrete floor. She stood with her hands behind her back, posture straight, heart thundering beneath a calm she forced into place. The others weren't there, just her. That was the first sign something was wrong. The door opened with a groan and a voice called her name. Not her rank, not her call sign, her name. That alone cut deeper than she expected. She stepped inside. The room was empty except for two officers and a single chair set across from them. No table, no papers, just scrutiny. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink, but beneath it was the heavier scent of tension. She sat slowly. The taller officer leaned forward, hands clasped. His eyes were sharp, gray, dissecting her without words. The other flipped through a small folder, too thin to hold the whole truth. "You held fire," the taller one said at last. No preamble, no pretense. Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed still. "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed." Silence. She didn't answer. Protocol exists for a reason. Split-second decisions can end lives, can cost missions. Do you understand? She did. Of course she did. She had lived it, breathed it, carried it in every scar and sleepless night. But she also understood something they didn't, that rules written in offices couldn't account for human eyes meeting hers in the ruins. "Yes, sir," she said softly. The officer with the folder looked up. His gaze wasn't sharp like the others, it was curious, searching. "Why?" he asked. One word, a chasm behind it. Why had she held back? Why had she broken training? Why had she risked everything for a choice no one asked her to make? Her lips parted, then closed again. Words formed in her chest but refused to leave. She thought of the boy, dust-covered, eyes wide, frozen in fear. She thought of her father's voice. She thought of the silence in the barracks, the unspoken bond among her team. If she told them, what then? Would they understand? Or would they turn it into data, into a mark against her record, into another reason not to trust her in the field? Instead, she let silence stretch. Her heartbeat was a drum. Their eyes bore into her. Seconds crawled. Finally, she said the only truth she trusted herself to speak. "I saw something you didn't." The gray-eyed officer leaned back, jaw tightening. The folder closed with a snap. Neither pressed further. Maybe they didn't want the details. Maybe the absence of words was its own shield. "You'll stay on rotation," the taller one said flatly. "But understand, hesitation is dangerous. It's noticed." "Dismissed." She stood, saluted, and walked out, boots echoing down the hall. Her hands trembled once she reached the empty stairwell, not from fear, from restraint. They hadn't asked about the child. They hadn't asked if she'd saved a life. They had only measured her against the line between obedience and disobedience. She gripped the railing, grounding herself. They didn't know. They didn't need to. Her actions weren't for reports. They were for the quiet truths that never made it back to headquarters. Back at the barracks, the team looked up when she entered. No one spoke, but their eyes asked the question. She gave them nothing, just a small nod that said enough. She was still here, still theirs. Later that night, Morales broke the silence first. His voice was low, almost ashamed. "You were right." She turned to him. "In the ruins, if you'd fired," he swallowed. "I would have done it, wouldn't have thought twice, but I saw him too, and I don't know how I'd live with it now." Her chest tightened. The weight in his words was heavier than Command's accusations. It was human, real, the kind of truth no debrief ever caught. She reached over, rested a steady hand on his shoulder. No words, just presence. And for the first time in days, Morales let out a breath that sounded like something breaking free. That night she lay awake again. The hum of generators outside, the faint murmur of her brothers in arms shifting in restless sleep. Her father's voice echoed once more. "Speak, or they'll write your story without you." But maybe silence could be a story too. Because sometimes the loudest defiance wasn't shouted. It was carried in the choices no one could take back. And she was ready for the next choice, whatever it was. What happens when silence breaks? The mission was supposed to be simple. At least that's how it was written. A convoy escort dusty roads, long stretches of waiting, eyes scanning rooftops and alleyways. Predictable danger, controlled chaos. The kind of operation every soldier had memorized down to instinct. But war never cared for simplicity. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when the first blast hit. A deafening crack. Heat and fire ripped through the lead vehicle. Metal screamed, men shouted, and the convoy ground to a halt in a storm of dust and confusion. Her ears rang, but she moved without hesitation, rifle up, eyes cutting through haze, every nerve alive. Contact left flank. Morales's voice roared over comms. The world erupted. Gunfire shredded the silence, a staccato of death bouncing off stone walls. Shadows darted in alleys, muzzle flashes splitting the dark. She pressed against the side of the vehicle, breath steady, finger resting against the trigger. Her eyes locked on movement, a figure darting across the rooftops, something long glinting in his hands. She exhaled, muscles coiling. But then the flicker of something smaller, a shape trailing behind him, too small, too fragile. Her scope caught it for just an instant, a child, running in panic, too close to the fighter. Her body froze, memory slammed into her chest, the ruins, the eyes, the choice she had already made once. Take the shot, a voice screamed in her ear. Her finger twitched, her heart thundered. The fighter lifted the weapon, angling down at the convoy. A second stretched like an eternity. She fired. The man crumpled. The child stumbled, fell, scrambled away into the shadows, alive. Gunfire still raged. The team moved with violent precision, returning fire, pushing forward, clearing corners. Morales dragged a wounded soldier into cover. Rafik's voice barked coordinates for mortar support. It was chaos, but it was survival. And she stood rooted for a moment too long, her shot still ringing in her ears, not the sound but the consequence. The child, again. Move, Morales grabbed her shoulder, jolting her back. She snapped into motion, advancing, clearing, breathing the rhythm of combat until the last shots faded and silence crept back over the broken street. The convoy was battered but intact, 2 injured, none dead, miracles counted in single digits. But the look in Morales's eyes when he glanced at her said everything. He knew. He had seen the hesitation, the line she walked again. Later in the makeshift perimeter, while medics worked and engines groaned back to life, he approached her. No one else close enough to hear. His face was streaked with soot and sweat, his eyes too tired to hide the truth. "You hesitated," he said quietly. Her chest tightened, words sat like stones in her throat. He didn't accuse, didn't condemn. He just stared at her, waiting. "I saw the kid," she whispered. Morales shut his eyes, cursed under his breath. Again. She nodded. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavier than the smoke still curling from wreckage. Then Morales opened his eyes. "You saved us. Don't think I didn't see that, but..." He swallowed. "What happens when hesitation doesn't save anyone? What happens when it gets one of us killed?" Her gaze dropped to the dirt. She wanted to answer, wanted to explain. But what could she say? That she believed in a line no one else believed in, that she carried a weight heavier than orders. She only managed, "I'll carry it." Morales studied her, jaw tight. Then he nodded once, not approval, not agreement, just acknowledgement. The engines rumbled to life. The convoy pushed forward again into the dark. She rode in silence, rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the horizon. The others talked in low murmurs, nursing wounds, recounting shots, whispering names. She didn't join. She never did. But inside her, the question Morales left burned like a fuse. What happens when silence is no longer enough? The answer was coming. She felt it in the wind that whipped through the cracked windows, in the way the stars disappeared behind smoke. She just didn't know if she was ready for it. What does it cost to never speak? The mission that followed was never supposed to be theirs. The briefing was rushed, the intel vague, the timing all wrong. But the orders came down like stones, immovable, unquestionable. They were to secure a high-value target deep inside a labyrinth of streets that seemed to swallow every patrol whole. Even the captain's voice had faltered when he read the assignment, but no one argued. Soldiers rarely did. They moved under a moonless sky, boots crunching gravel, breaths shallow beneath the weight of their packs. She walked near the rear, scanning rooftops, alleys, windows that looked more like empty eyes than buildings. Every step felt like walking into a mouth that was waiting to close. And then it did. The ambush was brutal, sudden, merciless. Gunfire poured from above, cutting the street into shards of sound and fury. Explosions tore chunks from the walls. The night burned with muzzle flashes. Her team scattered to cover, returning fire, shouting over radios that sputtered with static. Morales barked orders, dragging a bleeding Rafik behind a shattered doorway. Someone screamed, high, sharp, cut short. She pressed against a wall, rifle steady, eyes scanning through smoke and chaos. And there, through the haze, she saw him. The target, not a fighter, not a soldier. A man in plain clothes, clutching a satchel, running through the crossfire. Her scope locked onto him. The world narrowed, her breath slowed. And then just behind him, the flicker of movement again. A child, terrified, clutching his hand. Her chest seized. Take him, Morales's voice cracked through comms. Her finger hovered on the trigger. One squeeze and the mission was complete. One squeeze and the child was gone. She thought of the ruins, of the convoy, of every silent choice that had led her here. She thought of Morales's question, what happens when hesitation gets one of us killed? Her pulse thundered. The man stumbled, dragging the child behind him. Seconds stretched like eternity. And then she made her choice. She lowered the rifle. The satchel hit the ground a heartbeat later, not dropped, thrown. The blast ripped the street apart. Heat, light, screams. The ground vanished beneath her. When sound returned, it came in fragments, a ringing in her ears, shouts muffled, distant, smoke choking her lungs, pain everywhere. She tried to move, couldn't. Through the blur, she saw Morales, crawling toward her, blood streaming down his face. His mouth moved, but she couldn't hear the words. His hands gripped her vest, pulling, dragging, refusing to let her go. And behind him, chaos. The team broken, scattered, the mission failed, the child gone. She had chosen silence, and the cost was written in blood all around her. Morales's face hovered above hers, eyes blazing with fury and grief. She caught fragments now, words breaking through the ringing. Why, damn it, why didn't you? Her lips trembled, no sound came, only breath, only silence. Her vision dimmed, but even in that fatting world, she held to the truth she had carried all along. Some things couldn't be justified with words. Some choices were too heavy to explain. And sometimes, silence was the only way to keep them human. The last thing she saw was Morales's face, not anger anymore, not blame, just understanding. Because in the end, her silence had spoken. Not as defiance, not as hesitation, but as a final act of dignity in a world that demanded violence without thought. The battlefield grew quiet, dust settled, engines roared faintly in the distance. Her story would never be told in full, not in reports, not in medals. But for those who were there, her actions were the loudest speech ever delivered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it's gone, its echo lingers longer than any words ever could.